Here we are. It's crazy. We're back again. Who is this? Me being consistent on YouTube? That's crazy. Anyway, if you've been following me on social media recently, you'd have seen I upload these videos of me making loops. And today I thought I'd go a little bit more in depth as to how exactly I make these loops. So we're going to get into it. We're going to break down a couple and hopefully you get something out of it. I don't know why I put these on because... So obviously first things first, you got to find your first sound. Now this can range anything from keys to pads to a lead to vocals. Like you can start with anything. Most of the time for me, it's either keys or some sort of lead to generate some sort of idea. In this case, it was a lead that I've written into the piano roll as an ARP. This is what it sounds like. And this is just like a 1-bar pattern that I've duplicated over for 4 bars, and then for the next 4 bars, it's the same pattern. I just pitched up an octave, and I've layered that exact same pattern with 2 different sounds. So now it sounds like this. So this first one is in Nexus. It's in this LVXP Volume 1. It's the basic lead, and the second sound is in the same bank. It's just the harp preset. These two contrast each other a little bit, and I like the reverb of the harp. It makes this loop sound like Cornfield Chase, the Interstellar song that Hans Zimmer made. Some tips for making ARPs like this. For the first 3 notes or so, I'm arpeggiating a chord. So in this instance, it's a C minor chord because we're in the scale of C minor. And so if you start and end on the 1, you get that tension and release as it progresses and it sounds good. So you've got C, D sharp, G, which is the C minor triad. And then I've got a lot of semitones in here, which are really good for tension and adding that dark color that I use a lot. So after I added those 2 sounds in, I wanted a choir. So I went into Nexus again. It's this smooth choir sound. I turned down the attack on the filter and the volume envelopes, and also brought the release down so it was a lot tighter. And that sounds like this. And these are just C minor triads again. This one is with the 5th pitched up 1 semitone to the 6th, adds a lot of tension. And then literally I copy and pasted those chords and lengthened them so that they touched each other like this. I used the citrus pad to fill it out a little bit. More felt than heard. And then I did the same thing again, except I inverted the 3rd, which is a very popular thing to do to make your chords sound nice and lush. And then I had them ascend as I got to the end of the progression so that this tension builds and then resets as soon as the loop loops. So this preset is called Trap Bells. It has more of an impact, which sounds really cool. This is what it sounds like. So yeah, usually, and you'll see in a lot of my other loops in the future, I would bounce this and then pitch it up. But because this one sounds a little bit weird when this happens, that first lead sound kind of gets a little bit detuned, I guess is what you would call it. It kind of sounds weird. It's like this. It loses a lot of its character, so I didn't decide to do it for this one. It's just in its original key, but I do highly recommend you do that. At the end of making the loop, you bounce it and then pitch it. Just gives it a different flavor. But yeah, that's loop number 1. Let's jump into the next one. So again, if you follow me on social media, which you definitely should, I make a lot of these types of loops. This one's called Stars. And in here is a lot of techniques that I use very often, so I'm going to give you all the source right now. But first, this is what it sounds like. Beautiful. Okay, let's jump into it. So like I mentioned at the start of the last loop, I usually start with keys or a lead or whatever. This time I started with keys. Addictive Keys is usually what I use. Some other good pianos include Family Grand in Decent Sampler. It's free. It's really good. The felt piano in Sign Player, that's also free, which is very good as well. One that I used a while ago that I don't use as much anymore, I don't even have it installed on this computer, is the Soft Piano by Labs. And some of the pianos in Flex are really good actually. And Expand 2, I don't have that installed on this computer either, but there's some good pianos for you and most of them are free. So again, we've got a little bit of an arpeggiation here. Again, we start on the C minor triad. I use, for some reason, a lot of my loops start in C minor, and then I kind of just do whatever notes afterwards that sound good. In this case, it's a 4-bar pattern that just repeats. Very simple. Where it sounds unique and really where the atmosphere comes from is the effects. So first up, we've just got an EQ cutting out the low end, making room for the bass. Next up, we have Valhalla delay. Now the mix on this is 100%. So the whole thing is actually going to be shifted off grid by 1/8 dot time. This is what those two sound like. Sounds really pretty. And then Valhalla Supermassive. This is a great free sounding reverb. This is just the default preset. I've just turned the mix down. It's like this granular effect that I really like. I use it a lot. And then Valhalla Vintage Verb. It's a great reverb. The stock one I used to use a lot and still do to this day. That's really nice. But because this is shifted by 1/8 dot time, you do have to bounce it and drag it back on time, which is exactly what I've done here. And also another little tip, because while I was making this, I love this mixer track preset. So what I did is I saved it, and now I can go back and use it at any point in time when I'm using a piano with a similar arpeggiation pattern, or I'm just going for that same vibe. I highly, highly recommend that you do this. If you throw some effects on that sound really good, just save it. You never know when you'll use it next. So moving on to the next sound here, what have I got? We have this pitched electric Celeste. Now this is an electric piano and decent sampler. This thing sounds amazing, especially low down in the low mids and bass. It's just playing this simple pattern. And all that has is some EQ, very similar to the grand piano that we had before. Just a little boost at 550 Hertz to fill that bottom out. And also some compression just to even the dynamics. Next we have this Reese bass in Serum. This is one of my presets. It's super basic. It's got the triangle sub oscillator. We've got a saw wave with 8 units and a little bit of detune. This filter and a square envelope. And that's really it. Sometimes I put some distortion in here, but for this one, it's bare bones and it sounds really good. It's like this. So now we've really set the foundation, we can move on to the focus piece, which is the vocal. So 99% of the time I use Arcade for my vocals. This is the A Million Stars Bank, I think it's called, in Hooked. Without effects, it sounds like this. It's really nice, but we could really put it in a space with the rest of the instruments with some effects. So first up, we have Little Altar Boy. I've got the high octave double. This was quite a dry sound. I wanted to thicken it up a little bit and double it. Very subtle change. Let's move on. Next, I have some chorus. I throw this a lot on my vocals. I've turned the mix level down to about 35% here, because sometimes at 100% it can be a little bit too much. This is what it sounds like. Really spreads it out. It's starting to fit the vibe that the rest of the loop is asking for. Now, one of the most important things when you're making loops is to make sure all the sounds, all the instruments are sitting in the same space as each other so they sound cohesive. Remember earlier when we were putting effects on the piano, we had both Supermassive and Valhalla Vintage Verb. Well, it's come back with the resurgence on the vocal. We've got Valhalla Supermassive. I believe I literally saved preset as, clicked and drag and dropped it onto the Arcade. This is a really good way to transfer effects onto other mixer tracks that you want to copy, and Valhalla Vintage Verb. Now I tend to have the mix level down lower on one instrument, usually the lead or the vocal in this case, because you don't want everything to be drowned out and too far in the distance. Sometimes it calls for that, sometimes it doesn't. And in this case, I just use a little bit less with all the effects. Sounds like this. And then, as I mentioned before, the last thing I did is I bounced it and then put it in stretch mode and pitched it down, in this case 400 cents, and this is the final result. Alright, so that's how I make my loops. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments below. If you want me to go over something next as well, let me know. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Take it easy and peace.